Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the 85th episode of the Cotton Companion podcast. This year is thankfully winding down quickly, which means things are going to start gearing up for 2021 crops sooner than we realize. I'm Jim Stedman, Senior Editor of Cotton Grower, and as always, I'm joined by Cotton Grower's editor, Frank Giles. Frank, I know you and I are still running fast and furious to finish some things up before Christmas. How are you holding up?
Busy is the buzzword of the day. We have a lot going on this time of year through the magazines and different things, but keeps us out of trouble. We'll enjoy Christmas and the New Year and get back to a more normal schedule and hopefully get caught up, say, around February or March.
Or April or someplace around there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, as you know, as we discussed several episodes ago, EPA approved new 5-year registrations back in late October for 3 Dicamba products for XtendiMax, Ingenia, and Tavium. All those for over-the-top use in dicamba-tolerant cotton and soybeans. Now, depending on your point of view, that decision was either met with a sense of relief, with a lot more questions, and of course, the usual amount of outrage that we normally get from certain groups. And now the dust has settled a bit on that decision. We felt like it was time to bring in some experts to clarify the benefits, the changes, and maybe some of the holes in that new label, as well as offer a few tips on getting next year's crop off to a good start. So joining us here shortly in our virtual studio will be Dr. Stanley Culpepper, Extension Weed Specialist with University of Georgia, Dr. Tom Barber, Extension Weed Specialist with University of Arkansas, and Dr. Peter Dotray, who's Professor of Weed Science at Texas Tech University, and also AgriLife Extension Weed Specialist for the High Plains of Texas. Should be a great discussion. We hope you'll stay tuned to hear what they have to say. But now, here's a short message from our sponsor, Phytogen.
Phytogen is pleased to sponsor the Cotton Companion, bringing you the latest news to help you thrive all season long.
Thanks as always to the folks at Phytogen for supporting the Cotton Companion. And now we're going to turn things over to our colleague Robin Sittberg for a custom content interview with Dr. Ken Leger, Phytogen Cotton Development Specialist in West Texas and Oklahoma.
Hello, I'm Robin Sittberg of Meister Media Worldwide, publisher of Cotton Grower Magazine. I'm here today with Dr. Ken Leger, Phytogen Cotton Development Specialist, who covers parts of West Texas and Southwest Oklahoma. Welcome back to the program, Ken.
Glad to be here.
Well, I know your area in the Southwest experienced a lot of extreme weather in 2020. So what can you tell us about the 2020 season?
Well, really throughout the Southwest, we began the season with a fairly severe drought that either reduced the amount of dryland acres that were even attempted, or they were soon abandoned. So a lot of acres simply didn't happen. A lot of the irrigated acreage really had to have water all year long, so it was an expensive crop. We had a lot of heat units, but heat units without water are not as effective. Then that drought persisted nearly all season long. Then in early September, we had a cold snap that really caught some of the earlier maturing varieties and fields a lot more harsher than others. Then really the brick wall came down in late October, where the area experienced a widespread ice storm, snowstorm that really halted the season. I guess the bright spot is that fiber quality has been really, really good due to a dry harvest season.
Well, it's no secret that farmers can't control a lot of things, especially in terms of weather and sometimes even disease and insect pressure. So what can Phytogen cottonseed offer growers in terms of keeping their yields up and keeping things more stable in uncertain conditions?
Well, certainly a lot of the stability for Phytogen varieties come from a lot of our traits and technologies that are built into seed, starting with early season vigor. This was important, especially in the drought conditions that we were planting into. That early season vigor that Phytogen is so famous for did help establish some stands. All of our Phytogen White Strike 3 Flex Enlist varieties all offer that White Strike 3 insect protection. We did have some bollworms move in the area, so that was nice to have in-plant protection. Of course, our Enlist weed control system that offers tolerances to Enlist herbicides, glyphosate, and glufosinate help those growers have a lot of options in keeping those fields clean. And then really our Phytogen breeding traits with bacterial blight resistance, especially root knot nematode resistance, wilt tolerance, very important in helping stabilize that yield across all these fields. And of course, we're really excited. We just recently launched our reniform nematode resistance that we're ramping up in a big way in 2021. So we're looking forward to that as well.
Well, those all sound like excellent tools for growers to use to keep up their yield and quality, even when conditions aren't so great. I'd love to talk to you more about some varieties. Would you be willing to come back for another episode?
You bet. Look forward to it.
All right. Well, we've got to wrap up for now, but growers can always go to phytogen.com for more information. And thank you, Ken, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robin, and thank you, Ken, for joining us for that interview segment. And before we get to our panel discussion, Frank, just a quick look at what's happening in cotton since our last episode.
Yeah, Jim, we got a couple of items here. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has declined to reevaluate its July 2020 ruling upholding the EPA registration of Enlist Duo herbicide for over-the-top use on Enlist cotton, corn, and soybeans. In a 2-1 judgment, the Ninth Circuit panel has ruled that the premix of 2,4-D and glyphosate did not violate federal law. Environmental groups, including the Natural Resources Defense Council and Center for Food Safety, appealed the ruling and asked for a larger panel of judges to review the case. That appeal was declined on November 18th. The original suit was filed in 2017. The groups challenged EPA's decision on Enlist Duo, including volatility and increased herbicide use and environmental impacts. The majority ruling dismissed all but one argument and directed EPA to reevaluate the herbicide's impact on monarch butterflies, but left the registration intact. Any other appeals would be directed to the Supreme Court. Finally, the National Cotton Council has voiced its approval of the selection of Representative David Scott of Georgia as the chairman of the House Ag Committee for the 117th Congress. And Representative Glenn Thompson from Pennsylvania was selected as the committee's ranking member. National Cotton Council Chairman Kent Fountain acknowledged Scott's intimate knowledge of production agriculture and the challenges faced by today's farmers, and about Scott Thompson's years of service on the Ag Committee and their work in crafting several farm bills.
With that, let's move ahead and open the virtual studio to today's guests. We have Dr. Stanley Culpepper, who's Extension Weed Specialist with the University of Georgia, Dr. Tom Barber, who's Extension Weed Specialist with the University of Arkansas, and Dr. Peter Dotray, who's Professor of Weed Science at Texas Tech University and AgriLife Extension Weed Specialist for the High Plains of Texas. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on this episode of the Cotton Companion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's been an interesting year when it comes to cotton and especially to the Dicamba products. So let's step back to June for just a moment and say, what was your first thought when you heard about the Ninth Circuit Court ruling that vacated the Dicamba labels? And quite honestly, were you surprised?
For us in Arkansas, it didn't really have a large effect because our state plant board that handles pesticide regulation in the state had a current May 25th cutoff for all dicamba applications. So as far as Arkansas producers, the only ones that were affected by that ruling were those that farm inside the levee, the Mississippi River levee, because at that time they were able to make applications under a permit process. So as far as our growers, technically those were the only ones affected per our regulation.
You know, for Georgia, it was a huge deal. We were right in the middle of the season. We had been fortunate over the previous few weeks. We were getting good rain, so the crop was doing good, but also the weeds were growing exceptionally well, you know, including Palmer amaranth. So my first thought was, oh my, how long do we have to get to use it? We should make it through the season. And then as we learned, that became very, very challenging. So if the EPA hadn't come to bat for our growers, it would have been catastrophic for us if we'd have lost that tool in the middle of the season. It's one thing if you know you're not going to have it, but it's completely different if you've got a program, a good program set up, you're right in the middle of that program and you lose a tool, that leads to a catastrophe when you're fighting weeds like Palmer amaranth. So again, kudos to the EPA for supporting our farmers and at least allowing us to use the product to get us through the season.
And I would echo some of those comments. I would say, not surprised that changes were going to be made, surprised that they were made overnight. And growers have a game plan as to how they're going to manage weeds, and suddenly a major tool was removed overnight. So I think we were surprised at the extent of the change, but then okay with the fact that growers could use the current supply. And I think for the most part, for us to be able to use it through the end of July, I think most of the applications were made when they would have normally been made. So it turns out, I think we were able to control weeds pretty well as long as we could use existing stocks.
We're all glad that worked out the way it did, just to get everybody through the season. And I'm sure since then you had, each of you had some opportunity to provide some input to EPA about the re-registration that came in October. What types of things were you able to provide to the agency? What did they ask you for? And did you have any indication about when this new label announcement was coming, or was it sort of a surprise?
We've been successful working with the EPA for many years now, not only the three of us, but there are many members of the Weed Science Society, and the Weed Science Society as an organization has been working very closely with the EPA since really prior to the first registration in 2016. So we've all had an opportunity to share our unbiased research with them. The focus this go around was really on volatility, or more importantly, how to reduce volatility. So we've met with them several times as a group, as an organization, being the Weed Science Society, and they have been nothing but respectful to us. They've asked a lot of really good questions with our research and our data. And of course, let's be clear, one of the challenges with this technology is the data in Georgia doesn't necessarily the same as it is in Arkansas or Texas, right? So understanding the environmental conditions that influence a product like Dicamba has been part of our growing experience. So again, we've been sharing information for many years. They have been wonderful evaluating it, asking questions. Their questions drive us to generate better research to answer their questions, right? So it's been a great relationship. As far as knowing what was going to happen, there were several within the organization of EPA that publicly told us about when it was going to come out, when they were going to announce the potential re-registration of the product. I really didn't know it was going to happen in Georgia until just really right before that. So that was really exciting for our guys, for them to come into Georgia and to basically say, hey, we get to continue with a very important tool to support the family farm.
Yeah, I think you got the notice on that meeting about the same time I did, which was like, 6 hours before they were wanting to do it. So,
it was very well organized.
Definitely. Tom, what about you?
Well, and with my extension appointment, I didn't do a lot of the work on the volatility type research, at least the last couple of years I haven't, but I know that, or I'm pretty certain at least that some of our researchers provided some data to them on that. I think, as far as the way they've moved the labels to, recognizing the importance of the pH buffers and keeping that pH up at a level where it reduces volatility. We knew for the last couple of years, or we've known for the last couple of years, I guess, that adding glyphosate to the tank really reduces that pH and thus increases the volatility. And Stanley's right. I mean, in the Mid-South, it seems like it just acts as it's a different environment, and it just acts a little different than it might in Georgia or Texas. Plus, we have a lot more sensitive crops like soybean around that it's not, it shows up on, not necessarily that you're going to take a yield loss every time, but it's very visual and it's very sensitive. And so, Arkansas has a history ever since 2017 of being, having the most restrictive dicamba regulations. And so we know it's an important tool for our state. We have to, I'm glad I'm not making the regulation, I'll be honest. But, we have a big division in the state of growers that want to use it and growers that think that it's costing them yield every year. And they're, it's been that way ever since 2017. And so it's just been an interesting process to be a part of, to say the least. But I think, the EPA looking at the data, realizing, working with the companies, but realizing that some things needed to change on the label.
Peter, what about West Texas?
I'm not sure I have much more to add, which is great. Always following colleagues that are very active and know an awful lot. I would say, from a personal research standpoint, I'm not involved in a lot of that, the hoop house type research. I think folks in Texas, maybe around College Station, are doing some of that work. I think Stanley made the comment, I think the communication has been very good, both as weed scientists across the country and then communication with allied industry and EPA. So I think that the communication was there. Lots of discussions took place on the importance of the product in various weed management programs. Wasn't surprised when the label came out. I guess it seemed like a lot of us had been having communications with what the new label may look like. And when the labels came out, although I'm not sure they're any easier to interpret than some of the previous labels, but I think some of the things that were in there eventually when you could find it were not a big
Good.
surprise.
Now, I know the new label has some details in there about cutoff dates for application in cotton and soybeans, and some new guidelines for buffer zones. I'll be honest, my first reaction when I went through that and saw that the buffer zone things might be a little bit restrictive in certain cotton geographies based on the way they're written. Is that going to have any impact on use in your areas by expanding those buffer zones?
I mean, you mentioned a couple of things there, Jim. You mentioned first the cutoff date, then you mentioned the buffer zone. I'm in a region that grows a lot of cotton, probably 3.5 million acres in a 100-mile radius from the Lubbock area. And most of all of that is cotton. So the actual buffer zones probably not as critical for us, or the expansion of the buffer zones as critical as maybe other parts of the state and across the U.S. Probably was what was a bit more concerning for us was the restriction following a July 30th timeframe. We start planting cotton in South Texas in January, February. We're planting cotton up here until late June. So some of the latest planted cotton, that window for post-emergent applications may be 40 to 45 days. And I think for some of those folks, it's a pretty narrow window. But again, downstate and in other states, maybe that hasn't been viewed as a very big deal.
Well, to me, I think they got it. If Arkansas was going off the federal label, the soybean and the cotton should be flip-flop. I think we could, as far as a weed management perspective, if we haven't killed the pigweed by the end of June, we've lost the game already. And so, but in soybean, we're just like what Peter said with cotton. We plant soy. We make the joke in August that we're 95% planted and 5% harvested. We're still planting soybeans maybe in August sometimes. But to us, we're laying by cotton around the 4th of July. Everybody expects, the goal here in the Mid-South is to get that first bloom by the 4th a lot of times, which means we've probably laid everything by and got the irrigation pipe rolled out. So that's usually our quote unquote, if we didn't have a more restrictive cutoff, I think the growers would pretty much cut it off themselves by the end of June from a dicamba standpoint.
Yeah, I would say in Georgia and probably most of the Southeast, these restrictions are quite problematic. I'm a little bit like Dotray that we plant. We'll even plant cotton behind a weed, right? So the cutoff date is really problematic for us big time, but also we have really small fields, right? And if you have really small fields and you increase the size of those buffers, it's really problematic. So I have problematic, more problematic, and most problematic going. And I am just hopeful that what the EPA has said about willing to work with the states to try to address some of these concerns is workable, because that's the approach we're going to try to take to soften some of these restrictions, especially in a state that really hasn't had any issues with off-target movement, at least so far. So again, we've talked about it, different environments play such a role. One size label does not by any means fit us all. We need to be able to regionalize. We maybe even need to be able to write a state component of that label. And that looks like that's what the EPA has offered to work with us. And we're certainly going to find out if they stick to that.
Is your state plant board going to try to hang on to the state dates, or are they going to work within the limits of this label?
Well, fortunate for this interview, they met last week, I guess. The 3rd, I think, is when they met, 2nd or 3rd. And they tried several different ways or there were several different votes, I guess I should say, to change the current cutoff date and situation, but all of them failed to pass. So right now, not saying it can't change, but right now it's the same regulations as last year. So with the exception of inside the levee went full label. Inside the Mississippi levee, they had to change that. But other than that, it's currently it sets as a May 25th cutoff date for all dicamba in the state of Arkansas.
Peter, any indication there's going to be some movement or challenges to some of those dates out in your area?
So we've had a few conferences already with the Texas Department of Agriculture. We've got another conference set up here in a couple of days. You know, our challenge has been to go back and review some of the environmental data that typically we see early mornings, late in the day, general, wind speed issues. Also trying to, again, focus on some of the later planted cotton and what things might mean to some of those regions. So I think there's a lot of things that are really still on the table. Last year in the state, there was a 24C that allowed for some of the restrictions to be a little bit loosened. And certainly those are some possibilities, I think, for growers here in 2021.
Now, we talked briefly just a moment ago about some of the requirements now to add buffering agents to the mix, and to be able to show, document that those products are in. How's that going to help? Are your growers going to go along with that and keep the records they need to keep and work hard to keep the volatility down?
I mean, for us, I think the ones that have been following the rules will continue to follow our rules. The ones that haven't been following our rules will continue to not follow the rules. So that's just been my experience since this deal with dicamba has started for us big time in really 2015, when they started spraying it illegally before anything was registered. So, I think that, yes, there's probably the majority of our growers want to follow the rules and do the right thing. And I think they'll put the buffering. Plus the companies have at that plant board meeting last week, they mentioned that they would provide the buffering agent. So I don't know if it's going to be, you get a pallet of Ingenia, you get a pallet of buffering agent. I don't know how that works, but that was more or less the message at least that's the way I understood the conversation at the plant.
For us, we did a lot of work on that this summer, and we got some really cool data, and we got, probably more importantly for the grower, we got some really cool pictures. And this is ironic because I'm in a state that I or my colleagues, we haven't been on what we think is a volatility drift issue. My colleagues in the Mid-South, they think volatility is a huge component of off-target movement. I don't have a single one, but the research we did showing how much those products can influence potential volatility of dicamba was fascinating. It was some of the neatest stuff that I've done in years. Again, it's ironic for me, but I think once we share some of that information, show some of those pictures, my growers in a diverse state like this one, we grow 33 different vegetable crops that make the farm gate value report. Our growers want these products to stay exactly where we put them. And I think we're committed to doing whatever we need to do, because if we don't, long-term, the stability of pesticides is challenged. So we all need to step up when the science is in place. And I've been fortunate to see a lot of work of a lot of others, and that data looks a lot like ours. So the challenge that we have that I see going into 2021 is there's a rate by environmental interaction, right? So if you have an environment where you're getting just a little bit of volatility and you use a lower rate, you're fine. But if you use a lower rate and you're in one of these really problematic environmental conditions where you get a lot of volatility, you may not get as much out of it as you think you will. And as scientists, I think that'll take a year or two for us to number one, understand all the products. Number two, understand all the rates by environment. So I don't think we go into 2021 having all the answers. We just have some really cool research, some really cool data across the country that shows the benefit from these products and what they can do. And I think once our growers see that, they'll be impressed.
So I too am anxious to see some of the data coming out of Dr. Culpepper's program. And I know there's a lot of others that are doing similar type of work across the country. I would say in Texas, I mean, the growers, they want to do the right thing. So as they're learning more about temperature inversion, possibilities and the sensitivity of some of the surrounding vegetation, the importance of the spray nozzles and other things in the tank and the boom height and all of those things. I think they want to do the right thing. And as long as we're presenting the information to them in some of the auxin certification trainings that are mandated in the state, I think those are things that they will take them from the classroom to the field, and again, doing the right thing to ensure the long-term use of some of these technologies.
We've been down the glyphosate resistance road, starting to hear some talk of dicamba resistance in spots. What are you hearing or seeing in your particular areas with that?
Just right across the river, my counterpart Larry Steckel, I think they have identified it over there. I'm sure that we have it somewhere in Arkansas. We haven't officially identified it yet. What I can tell you is we do see more size response and rate response than we did when we first started looking or evaluating dicamba over the top of Palmer here in the Mid-South. Even at some of our station locations that I've worked at for the last 13, 14 years, I see a little difference now than the response I used to get. So I'm sure it's just a matter of time for us to identify it. We have 6-way resistant Palmer now in some populations, but so far haven't confirmed dicamba resistance. You talk back about the buffer zones. That's one reason, at least me as a weed scientist, hates buffer zones, because how do I control that pigweed in that buffer zone? And to me, it's just it's a breeding ground for resistance where you get reduced rates, or you're trying to use something else that's already marginal in controlling it. And so I think I'm not going to step out on a limb and say it's going to drastically increase, but I think it could potentially increase resistance in those buffer zone areas. And so we're on the lookout. Obviously, if our guys are spraying past the cutoff date just a little bit and they've got an issue with control, they're not going to call me and say, hey, I missed this pigweed with dicamba. But, going through I visit with consultants on a daily basis during the season. And what I hear from them is, there's more and more follow-up applications than there used to be when we first started spraying this, closer to the initial application. So that tells me that, we may not be seeing resistance yet, but anytime you see that increase in tolerance a little bit, then, it's knocking on the door more or less.
Well, I guess the good thing in there is there are other tools that are available to the growers.
Well, that's right. I mean, and so our growers have gone into the season in 18, the cutoff date was April 15th for dicamba. And so, the last couple of years, it's been extended a little bit, but so our growers are set up going into the season knowing that they're not going to have an extended amount of control option. And in cotton, if we don't plant, with the current margins that you can make on cotton, we've got to be planted by May 25th or our yields start going down anyway. And so we'll get an planting application, or at least one application in season of dicamba. We found that following that with a glufosinate application in 10 to 14 days does a pretty good job at cleaning up everything, pigweed wise anyway, the remaining pigweed. Now we still had to get through lay-by, but generally we're using something else there at lay-by, like diuron or maybe even gramoxone and diuron at that point. So, our growers are set up going in. Our programs include 2 residuals up front, 4 pigweed management, and then group 15 residuals in season with whatever post we're using. And that's been our program really since the onset of Roundup resistance. Got widespread back in 2010 or so.
Peter, Stanley, any resistance issues popping up out your way?
So Tom said a lot of things there, and I just want to echo a few of the things he said. First thing he said was we're on the lookout, and I think our growers are as well. This is technology, the active ingredient that's been around for 60 years. So to me, there's no doubt we've already got some differences in tolerances across the Amaranthus complex. We're looking for it. We've done some surveys. Tom also mentioned across the river, we've got some of that seed from Dr. Steckel that we're looking at overall, tolerance levels and making some comparisons to some of our populations. And I mean, I would definitely say it's real. It's a little different type of tolerance or resistance than maybe what we've seen with the glyphosate, where there's no symptomology that you see. I mean, some of these more tolerant plants still show a little bit of the epinasty, and they may lay over, but they just stand back up pretty quickly. So if seeing is believing, we definitely know it's possible, seeing some populations that thankfully have come from other places. I think our growers have always done a pretty good job at being diversified in their weed management approaches. Even in the Roundup ready era, we still had lots of growers who were using dinitroanilins pre-plant incorporated and various PS2 inhibitors at plant. Never solely relied on glyphosate, although the temptation was there, and I understand that. I believe, to me, the auxin technologies, these are good herbicides, but to me, they're not great. So the one good thing is, I think we've known from the beginning that they need help. They need help with other modes of action. And I think our guys have done that from the beginning. Like Tom said, we too are also trying to find a fit still for the glufosinate or the Liberty. We're probably in the part of the country where maybe it's least consistent, where it's hot and dry, humidity low, the product just doesn't work quite as well. But with that said, lots of projects trying to find a fit for Liberty, and I think a lot of them would suggest that you can replace one of the dicambas or one of the 2,4-Ds post-emergence. So I think we will continue to focus on a diversity of inputs. We will continue to look for weeds that are responding differently, or perhaps shifts in some of the populations that we're trying to control, and hopefully be after some changes in inputs sooner rather than later, so we don't run into the resistance issue that we ran into with the glyphosate.
For Georgia, the short answer is no. I'm not aware of any populations we're concerned about. Now, one thing that has always gotten me, and I've always said, I've kind of like what Dotray said, I've never been impressed with the activity of dicamba or 2,4-D on a Palmer amaranth bigger than 2 to 3 inches, right? So do we miss Palmer amaranth a lot? Sure we do, but I don't believe it's resistance. I think it's just natural tolerance. And because of that, you've had to build a good system, right? So we're diversified, we're integrated. My guys are doing quite well. You have a small percent of the population that sprays too much Roundup dicamba. If they keep it up, they're going to get us in trouble. I'm not as old as Dotray, but I've about convinced myself we have resistance in Palmer amaranth to every herbicide that we currently have, or every herbicide that's going to be generated. It's already out there, right? And the populations we have, it's there. So whether we've confirmed it or not, you got to assume on your farm somewhere there's a plant that's unique and is tolerant or resistant to whatever it is you want to do. And if you don't have the mentality to run a sound program, you're going to find it and you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But so far, things are going quite well for us. And I really think our rotation, we're really lucky with this peanut rotation, right? There's no dicamba or 2,4-D used in that peanut crop. And we do a lot of deep turning before the peanut crop. So our rotation is really, really helping our guys out. There's no doubt about that. And plus, we're using a lot of cover crops now that we didn't use in the past. So again, it's there. I think it's there. But nothing is on the radar that we need to be too excited about, other than running sound management programs to protect every single chemistry that we use.
Good deal. We've talked a lot about pigweed, and rightly so, but are there any other weeds in your particular areas that are rising or are popping up to be more problematic as of late?
My biggest ones are, at least in the last 2 years, are occurring later in the season. We're in great shape through mid-season. For the guys who decide they don't want to run a lay-by rig or a hooded road middle sprayer, we go over the top. We get the herbicide nicely on top of the cotton crop. It doesn't get the weeds that are up under the cotton crop, or it doesn't get residuals to the ground. And that's not a sound program. And when you run that program, what's happening to us is we're having tropical spiderwort. It's really Bengal dayflower, becomes a significant problem. And you may remember back before we had a lot of Roundup resistance in the Southeast, tropical spiderwort was moving as a troublesome weed, but just because of its natural tolerance to glyphosate or Roundup products. But tropical spiderwort is back on our radar without a doubt. Morning Glory, again, is interesting, and Morning Glory drives my point home. Liberty's great on Morning Glory. Dicamba's great on Morning Glory. 2,4-D's great on Morning Glory. So if you're not controlling Morning Glory, you need to think about what the problem is. And the problem is we got great control until lay-by, when the Morning Glory's hiding under the cotton, and we decide we want to spray over the top instead of running a lay-by rig, right? So we don't get coverage. So there's the Morning Glory late season and at harvest, and you got a problem. And then the third one that's really hitting me, and I think it's driven more because of the combination of glyphosate and dicamba, I'm having a lot more grass issues. And I think potential antagonism. It's antagonism related with the size of the grass when we spray. There's a relationship there for sure, but those conditions are causing me to have more grass problems that I have to address again in middle and later part of the year. And if you have grass escapes, and again you choose to go over top and not cover those escape grasses, we don't kill them then, right? So we got to help our growers understand, although it's slow, although it costs you more money. In some of our fields, we got to get these lay-by rigs and hooded sprayers on more acres and use that conventional chemistry that Tom was talking about to clean up some of these problems.
No, I agree with that. Grasses for us are probably one of the main issues we have because we're such a big rice state. Not that we rotate a lot of rice and cotton. Most of our rice is rotated with soybean, but barnyard grass, is definitely our most troublesome weed in rice. And so we're concerned for resistance buildup in that species. And so barnyard grass is present on probably just about every acre we grow. And so that's one of the weeds that we have to worry about towards the end of the year. Prickly cider is one we've seen, not as much in cotton, but in soybeans and cotton. The Liberty does a really good job taking it out. Both dicamba and 2,4-D are fairly weak on cider. Roundup's fairly weak on cider. Liberty works good, but in our straight extend soybean, we don't have that as an option. Now with Extend Flex beans coming out, that will be an option moving forward. So we've seen some more. I get more calls on prickly cider than I expected to get the last few years. For us, and it just may be an advent of the environment, but yellow nut sedge has become a big issue for us. It may be due to the wetter springs that we've had the last 2 or 3 years. In cotton, that's just one that, until we get a good stand of cotton, there's really not a whole lot of answers for. Now, a mixture of glyphosate and glufosinate or Roundup and Liberty work pretty good if you spray it twice. And so that's how we're managing that at this point. And we have some ALS resistance in some of our annual sedges coming out again of our rice rotation in some areas. So to me, those are the three that we're most worried about. Italian ryegrass, even though it's not in the season, we're having more and more issues with glyphosate-resistant Italian ryegrass moving up further to the north in the state. And so that's a different type of year, different management program, but it all takes money to do. So it's definitely hitting our growers' radar right now.
So some of the weeds that were mentioned, certainly we see here as well. The morning glories, the nutsedges in particular. We've got a few other more unique weeds, devil's claw, perennials like silverleaf nightshade and Texas blueweed. But if I had to put two weeds at the top of the list that are probably becoming a little bit more troublesome, first one would be kochia. We all are familiar with the principle of starting clean, and you need to start clean, because with the dicambas and the 2,4-Ds, you might not catch up. And you certainly have to start clean with the kochia, but there's populations that just aren't responding to glyphosate. They're not responding to dicambas like they used to, and it's critically important to get them real early, or get them with something that they're more susceptible to. So that's definitely a weed that's on our radar. Tumbleweed or Russian thistle maybe could be added as well, but paraquat still does a good job as a pre-plant burn down. So I mentioned it, but I don't want that to be one of my top two. I want to throw out there that, to me, maybe our second most troublesome weed is volunteer cotton. And it's knowing the technology that was planted last year, and then the options that are available this year. So we've certainly been focusing in on controlling volunteer extend flex cotton, controlling volunteer enlist cotton, and just, cotton in general, what products work well, the importance of sequential applications to make sure that that's not a weed that is present at the end of the year.
Now we've got this 2020 crop behind us. Everybody's starting to look toward next year. With all this new label in place, new technologies and things, just real quick, what do growers need to keep in mind when they're planning their early season management? Any specific recommendations you'd make? Stanley, I'll let you start on that one.
Well, nothing's really changed. I will say we're still picking cotton, so we still got a little bit more to go, unfortunately. But nothing's changed for the program for next year. As far as if you're concerned about the regulations on the new XtendiMax or Ingenia labels, give us time. We're going to see if we can address some of those concerns with data we've generated in the state. But you know what? You got to start clean. We prefer some tillage, or I prefer a cover crop in with the herbicides up front, but you start clean. I'm with Tom. You put 2 active ingredients that are effective on palmer behind the press wheel. You make a timely post 1, a timely post 2 with some residuals if you need it, and you run a daggone lay-by rig or a hooded sprayer where I can get me some diuron and some other chemistry in there. That lay-by application will protect that farm. I don't just mean protect the cotton crop. It'll protect the farm. And then, of course, if we miss anything, my guys understand the biology of palmer amaranth as good as I do. We confirmed resistance back in 2004. They know the difference between a male and a female. They're going to run out there and pull the females up, carry them out of the field, going to pull the males up. We don't want to be adding any seed to the seed bank. So the principle of the plan, diversified, integrated, has not changed, will not change. We'll try to address some of these significant new restrictions the best that we can. Cooperation is the key to success. We'll cooperate with the Department of Agriculture, we'll cooperate with industry, and of course our US EPA.
Any other thoughts?
I agree with Stanley 100%. I don't even know what I could add to that, but I'm sitting here we're doing all virtual county production meetings this year, and I was this morning making some slides, and unfortunately I don't have a whole lot different to say this year than I said last year. And so, or the year before for that matter, the content hasn't changed that much. Our message is the same. Sounds like on the same page as Stanley there in Georgia, and we just have to roll with the punches. I think where we fall behind up front is up front, and especially making that first post application. And one thing that I've seen with the cutoff date, and the negative thing, one of the negative things that may be from our cutoff date is everybody wants to get as many pigweed up as possible before they hit it with that dicamba application. And just to echo some comments made earlier, if you read the labels, I think it's 2-inch pigweed on most of these either XtendiMax or Ingenia. I took some notes down on the labels, and now I can't find it, but small pigweed is what we're targeting. I think we lose a lot if we miss that first application, and that's where we get behind, whether it's with dicamba or glufosinate, either one, or enlist in the enlist system. We've had some increases in enlist acres. So that first timely post to me is the most critical in setting the season up the rest of the year. And if we lose the battle in a particular field, usually that's where we've lost it.
Peter, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think one of my colleagues earlier said something like, the short answer is no, but then he continued to expand on a lot of things. So I guess I'm going to say the short answer is there is nothing new. But I think it's continuing to discuss the importance of starting clean, at plant herbicides, small weeds at the first application, like Tom just said. And it's unfortunately not cutting corners in economic times when cutting corner temptation is certainly there. But it's the full rate, it's the appropriate carrier volume, and it's making sure that at the end of the year, even later emerging small weeds aren't producing seed. I think we're doing a lot better at understanding the biology and ecology of Palmer amaranth. Some data that just came out recently from Dr. Bagafatinian at College Station would show, at least in Texas, the viability of the seed is very short, which I think is encouraging to try to suggest to growers that in a short amount of time, much shorter than something like field bindweed, which is 100 years, but a short period of time, we can bring some of these weed seed levels in the soil down to a much more manageable level. Now, yeah, there's millions of seed, but if we can, in a couple of years, bring some of the populations down to 5% of what they are today, I think we're making progress. We've still got good technologies. I think there's some new technologies that we might see here in a few years. The key is being diversified and start strong and finish strong.
Sounds great. And with that, I think it's probably time to wrap this discussion up. Otherwise, we'll keep going all day, and I don't think we'll probably start losing listeners at that point. Stanley, Tom, Peter, thanks for taking time to join us today. This has been great. Appreciate it, and I hope now that you can take some time to relax just a little bit over the next few weeks before we start all this over again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
All right.
Once again, that wraps up this episode of the Cotton Companion podcast. Thanks again to Stanley Culpepper, Tom Barber, and Peter Dotray for joining us in the virtual studio today. And thank you, dear listeners, for joining us. If you like what you hear on the Cotton Companion, please be sure to spread the word and tell your farmer friends about this podcast. And here's how you do it.
You can find the Cotton Companion in 3 easy ways. First, go to cottongrower.com/companion, or simply click the podcast tab at the top of the homepage. Second, subscribe to our channel on iTunes or wherever you find your podcasts these days. And 3, sign up for our weekly e-newsletter, the Cotton Grower e-News, that's delivered to your email inbox every Tuesday morning. You can do that by going to cottongrower.com/subscribe. Also, be sure to follow Cotton Grower on social media. We are at Cotton Grower Mag on Twitter, and on Facebook, you'll find us by searching for Cotton Grower Magazine.
Well, December issue of Cotton Grower should be hitting your mailboxes right along with your Christmas cards any day now. And Frank and I, as we mentioned, are already hard at work on finalizing our January issue. This podcast is produced by Tyler Hatch and Kim Henderson, our talented colleagues back at the world headquarters for Meister Media Worldwide in snowy Willoughby, Ohio. My name's Jim Stedman. His name's Frank Giles, and we'll be back with you in a few weeks for the next episode of the Cotton Companion. Until then, we wish you all the best and stay safe.
Yeah, he works and he works and he works and he works all day. God made a farmer. Yeah, he works and he works and he works and he works and he works all day. God made a farmer.
Phytogen thanks you for listening to this edition of the Cotton Companion. To learn how you can thrive with Phytogen, go to phytogen.com.